Good day. Welcome to another edition of Ebima Mungo's Perspective on Global Affairs. Before I continue, I'll urge you to please press the like button. And if you're new to this show, please subscribe. I want to apologize for not having a show yesterday. It was due to technical problems. Anyway, today my question is a very sober one. Who do you think may possibly have a first strike if there's a nuclear exchange in this world between Russia and NATO? Who do you think may possibly make the first move? The news cycle for the past 1 week or two has been dominated by news about new innovative Russian nuclear weaponry. Today we got to see another one, a very devastating one which the Russian deputy head of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, former president, says it's a doomsday weapon. It's called the Poseidon. And it was unveiled today. It was announced that there have been a test of this weapon. This weapon is a very formidable weapon because it's a drone submarine, and as a drone submarine, it is it has almost 100 tons of nuclear megatons of nuclear output. It is supposed to be sent close to a shoreline and then detonated there. It can be stopped and it can't be intercepted. Poseidon underwater drone launched from world's largest submarine. This is a new weapon that is very frightening, and it was unveiled today. The Poseidon is a Russian nuclear doomsday torpedo, 20-meter device. It's deployed from a submarine and remotely controlled. It is equipped with warhead with a power of 100 megatons, and its underwater speed is 185 kilometers per hour. Detonation generates a radioactive tsunami 500 meters high, which destroys targets on the coast. It's a very formidable weapon. And following on other weapon systems that the Russians have been outputting in the recent times, we also got news today that the Russians are soon going to put into combat readiness the SAMAT, which is a very powerful intercontinental ballistic missile. Anyway, all this talk of nuclear weaponry prompted President Trump to put out this tweet today. The United States has more than any other country, nuclear weapons more than any other country. This was accomplished, including a complete update and renovating of existing weapons during my first term in office. Because of the tremendous destructive power, I hated to do it, but had no choice. Russia is second and China is a distant third, but will be even in 5 years. Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. That process will begin immediately. Thank you. Yes, the President of America has decided that America too shouldn't be left out in all this. China does not particularly say much about its own nuclear test and nuclear weaponry, but it has been showing a lot of its other conventional arsenals, different types of weapons. But it also showed a lot of its weaponry during the September 3rd campaign. The weaponry that the Russians have been putting out there, this one particularly, the Berezhevnik. The Berezhevnik is another of these nuclear weapons that were just unveiled last week. It's loitering. It has a nuclear engine. It has loitering capabilities, and it can fly for over. If unlimited range, it can continue to fly without being stopped since it is nuclear powered. And these systems have become the problem too, that has prompted quite a lot of worry in the space of in the political space, especially among NATO and East European countries. They are really worried about it. This signaling by Putin is causing a lot of disquiet among the political class in Europe. But it doesn't change anything. They continue to ratchet up their anger and their attempts to destroy the Russian economy. But one person who feels that if Russia makes a move against them, against NATO, Moscow will be flattened, is the Belgian the Belgian Defense Minister Theo Frankel has said that NATO could wipe Moscow off the map. He said that this kind of discussions is what's going on now in Europe. We're beginning to hear very, very strong rhetoric. It's moved beyond destroying the economy of Russia, which has led to several rounds of sanctions by the whole of Europe, 19 rounds by Europe, and then quite a lot of other sanctions placed by America. The latest being the sanctions against the two biggest oil companies in Russia, Rosneft and Lukoil. So we see this increasing ratcheting up of talk about nuclear, and Russians are signaling very clearly. We should understand why Russia is really worried and why Russia is putting out these new weapon systems. First of all, NATO has moved relatively very close to Russia. There's a base in Romania that has that houses some of these weapons that can be nuclear armed. The Russians are really, really worried about it. Beyond that, also, they have a lot of bases in England, in Germany, that can just be equipped with nuclear weapons and very close to Russia. So the Russians are really worried about it. And because the biggest instigator is America, the Russians are making weapon systems that are supposed to not make America feel safe, because the America feels very safe because they have two oceans far away from there. They're far away from Europe. Most of the belligerence is between European countries, and America, though leading the whole security umbrella in Europe, is still far away. But the Russians don't want them to get that sense that they can do harm to the Russian state and get away with it. So weapon systems like the Boris Vesnik and the Poseidon are to show that they can bring harm to American cities and the American state. It's quite a terrible time for us now, because this discourse on nuclear armament is getting to be quite a lot, and it comes in the face of the fact that all the treaties that are supposed to guide limitations of nuclear arms are falling off. They are falling off their life cycle, or they've just been shredded apart, like President Trump left the INF treaty, which is the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, in its first term. And the START treaty now, which was, if we should remember, signed between Medvedev and Obama far back. It has lapsed and it was renewed, and now the Russians are calling for a renewal of it. So we see this situation where there are some treaties that all the treaties, ballistic missile treaties, all of them are falling off. George Bush went off the ballistic missile treaty. So only the START treaty is hanging now by the thread, and President Putin and President Trump are supposed to have met to discuss that. But the political pushback in both in its domestic political space and in Europe made sure that he postponed, or he claims he has postponed, that trip. So we are in a very bad state now. We're in a bad state. As regards to what Frankel said, the Medvedev was very, very hard. Medvedev reminded him that he called him a clown. He called the Belgian defense minister a clown, and he reminded him that the Poseidon is a doomsday weapon. We should remember that Belgium is a small state that can easily be wiped away by a weapon like that. But it's really bad that at this time, rhetoric of nuclear exchange is really getting high now, and it's causing a lot of worry. It's causing a lot of worry. But there was one point of the escalation today, and that is the meeting going on in South Korea between President Trump and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. But before then, I'd like to talk more about what's going on in Ukraine. The Ukrainian situation is there. It's there because President Putin has even said that the Ukrainians may be denying as much as they want, but he's willing to allow international journalists to come into that space go to Kupiansk and go to Pokrovsk and see that truly the Ukrainians have been encircled. What he's trying to do, we should remember that in 2014, I think, or 2015, leading up to the Minsk I agreement, there was a time when over 10,000 Ukrainian troops were encircled. And at that time, the intervention of the European leaders, then Angela Merkel and I think the French president was Hollande, they came in and they tried to negotiate peace so that those encircled Ukrainian soldiers were ultimately released in, and the Minsk, I think it was the Minsk I agreement was reached. That agreement fell off and it was not adhered to. But this time around now, they now have the situation where we have these Ukrainians encircled. It's not like they're completely encircled. There's a space for them to be able to move. I have a picture here by one of the mapping agencies that shows where they have been encircled in Pokrovsk. And to a large extent, the fire control that the Russians have, they have a space where the Ukrainians can live, but they have complete fire control using their PFV drones, their drones. So the Ukrainians can't supply the people in this pocket here. They are caught up in this pocket. They are caught up completely. And there are over 5,000 of them. They've been reducing because over the course of the past 3 days or so, they've lost quite a lot of people, maybe 150 of them. So they keep losing people. And Putin is saying that, look, the Ukrainian government should do something about it and negotiate some form of a peace or so. I don't know what kind of pressure he's trying to put on Zelensky, but Zelensky is not buying it. And Zelensky would never allow this kind of public relation disaster to be allowed to happen. But what we are seeing here is a humanitarian crisis where they may need to make a deal as they did in Mariupol when the Azov battalion was encircled, locked up in the Azov steel plant, and they were almost destroyed, but they surrendered. Now the Russians are telling them in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk to surrender. They're sending leaflets in there and telling them to surrender so that they will not be destroyed, because ultimately the Russians have said that they have just a limited amount of time and they will take on its destruction campaign. This time, I don't think they want to keep too many prisoners. So they're giving them a time frame within which to surrender. Then they will go in and start to destroy them. Meanwhile, they are fending off all the counterattacks by the Ukrainians. This is going on as the Russians are moving on in Volchansk. They're moving in the Sumy region. They're just moving all across. They may be said to have been moving in very slow beats, but this is ultimately the aim of the Russian army. They did want to get territory. The drone warfare changed the nature of the war. The massive infusion of NATO equipment changed the nature of the war. But ultimately, their aim was attrition. They wanted to destroy the Ukrainian army, and 10,000 people, to destroy them now will mean that you have removed 10,000 potential people who could do harm to the Russian army. They don't know what kind of leverage they want over the Ukrainians if they get them to surrender, but that's what it is. We should remember that the Russians have been fighting an attrition war. Their stated aim is the destruction of the Ukrainian army, and this suits their purpose very much. This last campaign in Kupiansk, and especially in Kupiansk and I mean in Pokrovsk, because Pokrovsk and all the remaining settlements, the big cities within the Donbass are the last most well-fortified settlements. Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, Sevyansk, they are all very, very well fortified, and it means that it's been a slow and hard battle for the Russians. They lost a lot of people, lost a lot of military equipment, high armored equipment in this particular campaign, but they ultimately have achieved it. And they've done what the Russians always do, which is to ultimately squeeze their opponents. It's just a sad thing now. We just hope that there's some sense of humanity comes into the minds of the Ukrainian leadership. You won't find most of this reporting in the international press. They have decided to look away from it. News like this is not good for the kind of narrative they want to put out there. So it's really bad. The Ukrainians are in a very bad way now. And Zelensky continues to talk about, he meets with partners, he's working, hoping that the sanctions will do more harm to Russia. We keep hearing how, because of the sanctions, India and China are saying that they're going to stop buying Russian oil. I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, one of the Indian companies today actually denied that they've stopped. They just said that they are looking to how it will affect their operations and their purchases from Russia. Ultimately, I do know that the Russians and the Indians will continue to trade. There's one thing the Russians will always be able to do, and that's they can always discount their oil. They can discount it to such a level that it just doesn't make sense for anybody to go buy oil somewhere else. So this is what we're seeing here now. They're really, really in a bad way. Anyway, one of the big news of the day is the meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Trump. It finally happened. There's been a lot of preparations for a long time. And finally, President Xi Jinping and President Trump met in South Korea. The meeting ultimately is one that was on the footing of equals. Like I've said several times, I've said it in all the shows I've had here, that this is a reality that has not happened in 200 years. In 200 years, America has never found herself challenged economically. The British did challenge them in 1812. They fought a war with the British, then called the 1812 War, because the British tried to put sanctions on them, embargo on them, and they fought with the British, and both parties then finally got some outcomes they wanted after that war. But since then, America had become an economic juggernaut. By the early part of the 19th century, they were already the world's leading economy. But the world wars also now meant that they were now the preeminent economy after both World War I and World War II. Since then, they dictated the tone to every other person, foe or allies. It was what America said that every other country acceded to. But today, we saw that they had this meeting, and it was done in South Korea. It was done on the basis of equals. What will create disparity and equality? Well, it will be that the fact that the Chinese are by miles the king in purchasing power parity. But beyond that, beyond being that they lead in purchasing power parity also, they have also become the leading trading partner to almost all the countries of the world, 150 countries in the world. But they are now the number one preeminent manufacturing country. They are the number one exporting country. But amongst all of this, they are the one country that controls the supply chains of some of the most valuable and most needed products in the world. For a very militaristic country like America, what they need, what the Chinese have over them is their need for substances like antimony, gallium, and of course, we know the rare earth metals. The particular case of the rare earth metals is one that involves the need it's using both the production of semiconductors, which is America's big strength. America is still preeminent at that particular space, while the Chinese tend to commoditize the products that come out of the use of semiconductors. The Americans still are the ones who lead in designing and producing, and that's why we have companies like NVIDIA, Qualcomm, and Google and AWS, all producing data centers and chips that are very sought after by the Chinese. Much as the Chinese are doing their best to try and improve their own or create their own, they are still far behind the Americans, and they would want to have access to America. At least let there not be as much friction as there is in purchase of these things. So America weaponized their access to technology, and the Chinese weaponized their access to the supply chains for rare earth metals. So We, at the time of my making this video, the meetings are ongoing. They have not concluded their bilateral, but by the morning, I'm sure we'll know what the outcome of their bilateral is and all that. It's happening after President Trump had a very, very successful tour of Europe, of Asia, sorry. He went to the ASEAN conference. He signed a lot of deals regarding rare earth metals. Most of his emphasis was the deals he was signing on a bilateral basis with the countries that will help in not only getting the rare earth metals, but processing it also and refining it. And those are the kind of deals he was signing with Vietnam, with Australia, with Malaysia, Thailand, all those countries that do have their own supplies of rare earth metals. But most notably, it must have been that was very important to him in his tour of Japan, because in 2010, the Chinese did this same rare earth metal thing when they were angry with the Japanese, and they stopped them from getting access to rare earth metals. It affected Toyota and affected a lot of Japanese manufacturing. So they too started building out their own supply chain. So while the Chinese controlled a vast majority of the supply chain, the Japanese too have also built the capacity. So President Trump did have his own relationship with the Japanese in trying to use their expertise and their skill and maybe scale up. So they had agreements on that. Beyond that, too, he also got a commitment for investment in America. It was a very good tour for him. He was feted, he was treated like a king, he enjoyed it. In fact, literally, the South Koreans even gave him the crown, a crown of a king, so that, and he jokingly said he would very much like to wear it. But on a serious note, it was a very successful trip for him. Anyhow you looked at it, he has really leveraged his tariff war to get a lot of compliance and a lot of respect from most of these other countries. But he too also showed some form of respect, because he also went there wanting something off of them, which is bilateral agreements to increase production and processing and refining of rare earth metals. So he was a little bit much more diffident and deferring. You can even say condescending somehow to some of them in the way he treated them. He didn't treat them particularly the way he was treating them a few months ago, because now he needs something of them. And you can thank the Chinese for that, because it was by the fact that the Chinese had blocked out access and weaponized something that they needed so, so much. America has kept on hung on to the military part of their manufacturing. So Raytheon and Lockheed Martins and all these other companies that do manufacturing of missiles and aeroplanes and Boeing and all that, they all need this rare earth. And it is for that reason why he too was a little bit you can dare say humble too. He was quite humble. But he did show and project America's power in Japan when he went to the aircraft carrier and rallied the troops there and told them that they were one of the greatest in the world. Anyway, today is a very, very sobering day, and I asked a question in the beginning part of it. Who do you think may ultimately push the button first? Let me know your views in the comment section. And if you are new to my channel, please subscribe. This is where I would like to end my show for today. I urge you to like and share. And until we see again in my next video, you have a good day.